Eat. Tonight, most of you know us, I think, but I'm Vicki. I'm an occupational therapist with the Child and Youth Health team at Six Nations Health Services. We have Angelie, who is a registered dietitian with our program, and then Tanya, who is also an occupational therapist with us. We all work with families who have kiddos who struggle with feeding or eating. And often we get that, picky eating is a big concern for them. So we thought it would be helpful for the community to offer a presentation that kind of addresses just some general strategies that you can be doing in your homes to support your kids who maybe struggle with eating a wide variety of foods. As we go through the presentation as well, I think you'll often hear us refer to parents, maybe caregivers, but we do know that there's lots of different roles out there, whether it's a grandparent or aunt or uncle or sibling or guardian, we know there's lots of different roles out there. So, but just for the ease of the presentation, we will just refer to parent or caregiver as we go along. Okay, so we will get going.
Next.
So, was there anything else, Angelie?
No, I just wanted to make sure you wanted this slide.
Yeah, no, it's good. So tonight we'll kind of address, what is picky eating, kind of some steps to feeding and eating, the roles in feeding and the division of responsibilities between parents and children, mealtime environments and how they can impact a child's willingness or positive experience with eating, structure and routine and why that's important, the impact of family meals, and then we'll get on to some strategies that you can take away and hopefully apply with your families at home. And then we'll finish off by going through a few scenarios that we can discuss together as a group and work through together. And then of course, we'll end off with some questions and answers. So I think we've scheduled about an hour and a half-ish for the presentation. Hopefully we can stay within that time frame, but we do ramble on, so. So just getting started. So picky eating, and what is it? To be honest, there's no real definitive definition of what picky eating is, and depending on an approach you take or a Google search, you can get a wide variety of definitions of what picky eating is. For the purpose of the presentation, I think we'll kind of focus on, characterizing picky eating in the following way. So it's a limited range of or repertoire of foods that the child will eat. And some approaches will actually put a number on that. So some will say, like, if your child eats under 30 different foods, they're a picky eater. But we think, if there's a limitation in their range of foods, I think that, is pretty characteristic of a picky eater. An unwillingness to eat familiar foods or try new foods, a strong preference for a particular food or a particular food texture or particular food taste. So kids who only eat kind of mushy soft foods, or kids that only eat really salty foods, like those can be characterized as picky eaters. If your kiddo demonstrates increased behavior, anxiety, or emotional distress with meals and eating, that would indicate a characteristic of a picky eater. Those kiddos who, they're eating a completely different meal every meal compared to the rest of their family because they're limited in the range of foods, that's another characteristic. And then finally, a picky eater is a kid who is often defined as they don't have a medical reason that's limiting their food or intake. They don't have oral motor concerns that are really limiting the amount or types of foods they can eat, or other physiological reasons that create their struggles with eating. That being said, if you are a parent or a caregiver of a child who does have a medical reason or a neuromotor delay that is impacting their eating, the strategies discussed tonight will be helpful for you. It just might mean that we would encourage you to reach out to us to maybe discuss additional therapy or support in order to guide those kids through improved eating habits and abilities to eat. Good. So to start off, I wanted to just talk about a few myths associated with eating. If you were to do a Google search about myths of eating, you'd probably come up with hundreds. But there's just a few that I wanted to focus on with respect to picky eating and our presentation tonight. So one is that eating is instinctive, that it's easy, and that it only really involves 2 steps, so sitting down and eating. First off, eating is only instinctive for the first few stages of life, or first few months of life. So up until about 5 or 6, when we're born with reflexes that support us to, suck and swallow and help us kind of get through those first few months of life. And then once those reflexes leave us, eating really becomes a lot more of a learned behavior. So the impact of the environment, the relationship with the caregiver, their exposure to a wide variety of foods, their relationship with other, individuals in their environment and their relationship with food, all of these impact the child's ability to eat. So just, keeping that in the back of your head. Eating is easy. Yeah, for some of us or most of us, eating is easy. And most of our kids, yes, eating is easy. We are able to guide them through those developmental stages of feeding pretty seamlessly. But when you have a child who struggles with eating or is a picky eater, it becomes not so easy. And really, eating is probably one of the most complex skills that we do as human beings. It involves every organ of our body, from our muscles to our skin, to our sensory systems, to our respiratory systems, to our endocrine system. Like it is in our digestive system, it is all involved in eating, and it all needs to be coordinated. So if we have a breakdown in any of one of those areas, even just a very simple thing, it can really throw off our ability to eat. And finally, the 2 steps. And again, sure, for most of us, it does involve just sitting down and eating. But for those kids who struggle or have a breakdown in some of those physiological systems, it can become a bit more difficult. So I just want to talk a little bit more about those steps to eating. So really, eating can be broken down into about 5 major steps, or as many as 32 little steps. Most of us are familiar with, putting food in our mouth, chewing it, and swallowing, and those are actually the last, 28 to 32 steps. It's all those, 20 some odd steps before that we don't really even know about or think about or register. But they do become really important for kids who struggle. So it's important to think about these steps as we move forward to help our kids who struggle with eating, and knowing that the steps are progressive. So a kid who enters a food at stage or step 2 can't automatically jump to biting, chewing, and swallowing automatically. We have to guide them through those stages or steps in a progression. And as I said, when those kids struggle, we want to consider where they're at on that continuum and meet them at that level, so that we're presenting a positive experience with food. We can flip. Good. So our first step to eating is just being able to tolerate the physical presence or sight of food. So this may even be just being in the same room as where the food is. You know, being in the kitchen when the food is made could be the initial step for some kids. You know, being able to then tolerate the food being at the table or across the table, and then moving closer to the child. So being able to tolerate the food directly in front of them, and then eventually being able to look directly at the food. So this would be kind of the first bottom step of the feeding continuum. The next step is more about the smell of food. So of course, often just being in the room and being able to smell the food is a big step for kids. And again, being at the table and smelling the food, and then being able to directly smell it. So it might even be, you know, bending over and smelling it, just, you know, that sort of thing. Is an actual step in the stages of feeding. Next one. Next would be being able to interact with food. So this may be just helping you prepare the food, being able to hold the bowl while you stir, and then maybe being able to hold the spoon and stir, being able to scoop the food and put it on the plate, or pour the food and put it somewhere else. You know, if the food's in front of them, being able to poke with it, poke at it with their fork or spoon, or another piece of food that they do tolerate. Step 4 is, so next we actually get into being able to touch food and touch food with our skin. And this usually starts what we call distally, so as far away from our center of our body as it can. So that would be with our fingertips. So often you'll see kids who will just poke at the food. They may then be willing to kind of put their whole hand in the food and move it around. They may even then be willing to pick it up, and then they'll kind of start to move it towards the center of their body and their face. So they may move towards their chest, their head, and slowly move towards the mouth. And finally, we get to where it gets to the mouth.
The beauty of the internet.
Shoot, did we
there you are.
Am I back? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you were lagging quite a bit for me.
Yeah, you were lagging.
Oh, everybody else too? Okay.
That's okay. So I just moved on to the next slide, but I wasn't sure where you left off there.
I kind of left off here, just, you know, we touch the food with our fingertips to our hands, move it up to more our face, and eventually it reaches our mouth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And
then finally, step 5 would be where we actually see a child put the food in their mouth. So it may start out by them putting it up to their lips and then licking the food off of their lips. And then maybe actually directly licking the food, then moving toward more taking a bite of food and maybe spitting it out immediately, maybe biting, holding it in their mouth and spitting it, biting, chewing and spitting it, and finally bite, chew, and swallow. And we finally are at the stage of eating. So as I talked about before, often most kids just go directly to this last stage and handle that quite well. But for kids who struggle, it's important to to be aware of these steps and kind of assess where they're at, even as caregivers and parents, so that when you are creating expectations for your children when it comes to eating, that the expectations are at a level that the child can handle. I think that's a really important thing in everything we do, is creating realistic expectations for our children, and it's no different for eating. So, you know, keeping these stages or steps in mind as we go through the presentation, and as you're thinking about your own kids. As we go through, I think a lot of strategies will link back to where your child is at on this continuum. And that being said, something I didn't say was that a child could be at obviously step 5 for one food, but at step 1 for another food. So you have to look at each food individually and kind of acknowledge where they're at with each food as they go through. So I think that's it. So now we wanted to move on to just talking a little bit more about the different roles and you know, some things we can be doing to support our kids as they're working through their eating challenges.
Awesome. Thank you, Vicki. I hope you can hear me okay. I don't know if I'm off mute, but if you can't, just send me a message and I'll get it. But thank you, Vicki, for going through those steps to feeding. That was really helpful. And I think, you know, it's really important to assess kind of where your child is at, or what is this expectation. And I think it's really important to really assess where you're at. And I have so many clients, and I'm sure the other OTs do as well, talking about, you know, my child is so picky. How can I make them eat? And I just want them to eat vegetables or summer meat. And, you know, it's more than that. It's more than the nutrition. And I think it's really important to really focus in on that. So the secret to a healthy eater, there's lots of them, but some of them are the environment is so crucial. The behaviors of the parents, as well as those mealtime routines, which we'll touch on a little bit later. And parents and caregivers, your behaviors are so, so important when it comes to the eating of your child. So the roles in feeding, so this is something that it's a model called the division of responsibility. And it was kind of founded by a dietitian. Her name is Ellen Satter. And basically it identifies what the roles are of your child and the parent or caregiver. So children do really well when they have some sort of predictable routine, as we'll learn later, as well as some sort of responsibility in the process. And like I mentioned, that parent attitude is so, so important when it comes to this feeding. And I'll touch on that in a moment. But the most important phrase for this whole role in feeding is you provide and your child decides. So I'll say that again. So you provide, so you being the parent or the caregiver, and then your child is the one, and their role is to decide. So let me get into what that means a little bit further. So as a parent or a caregiver, your role is you decide what, when, and where of the feeding experience. So what meaning what food, what beverages, making sure that it's age appropriate, when you're going to eat, you know, that consistent eating schedule. And then where are we going to eat? Are we going to eat at the table? What are we going to eat with? Are we going to eat with our chair? So just that consistent eating environment, as well as what we're eating. So that's the parent's role. So just remember that throughout the presentation, because that'll come in place and it kind of flows throughout. The child's role is, again, before you kind of tell them what, and then the child decides. So the child decides how much and whether they're going to eat the food. So whether they're going to eat the food that you offer. So keeping in mind that's food that is within their preferences, obviously, and it's balanced. And we'll talk about that in a second, what that looks like. But I also said nutrition is not the first and foremost of picky eating. The behavior and the environment is so, so important before the nutrition. So my OT colleagues are totally on board with that. And I am too. Like, I'm a dietitian, and a lot of people come to me and say, just give me a list of what I need to feed my child, and I want them to be healthy. And I'm telling you right now, that's there's more than that. So yeah, it's kind of, the child is going to decide how much food and whether they're going to eat the foods that are put out for them. So I hope that makes sense to you. So again, if the parents do their jobs with feeding, the kids will do their jobs with eating. Even though that kid there doesn't look like he wants to be into the meal. But again, like Vicky mentioned, that exposure of just having that food on the table with him is so, so important. So you may be wondering now, okay, so I'm going to provide the food, I'm going to provide the routine, I'm going to provide all these things, and my child's going to decide, okay, so how does this work and why does it work? So your child has these physiological cues. We all do in some way. Now, we've hindered a lot of those things just based on our routines and our environments and all those things. But this model really works if we are consistent. So if you're letting your child listen to their body and you're letting them decide what and how much, this will eventually work. And so there's lots of research, and this has been going on for a long time. And this model is very evidence-based. So if it is practiced consistently and you're following those rules, it can work. Now, I'm here to tell you that force feeding, bribery, and pressure around meals will backfire. And I know that we're brought up in that way, and we're going to touch on a few examples later on that, you know, you have to finish your plate, you have to eat 5 more bites. And I know we're brought up in that way, but it's proven that that doesn't work. So this is kind of the model that I practice and a lot of us practice with picky eating. So I mentioned earlier that parents' behaviors are so, so important, and kids want to be like you. They want to eat like you. They want to behave like you, not only in eating, but in every aspect of life. But we're talking about eating here. And so being a good social role model with feeding is so important when it comes to those family meals as well as just eating. So when I say that, I'm talking about when you're eating, practicing how to properly chew and just modeling that, and being at the table with your child. We're going to touch on family meals a little bit further, but I know we want to go and, you know, empty the dishwasher or clean the counters, but it's so important to be a part of that family meal because that's a time where we connect, and we're going to get into that further. But social modeling is so, so key. So having that positive environment and stress-free environment is so crucial. Okay, so this is so important. I said nutrition is not the only thing with picky eating, and that is so, so true. And there isn't a perfect diet. So a lot of people come with that list and say, just write me a list of what I need to buy at the grocery store and that'll work. So there's a lot out there in the media, which definitely impacts all of our lifestyles. But I just want to say that, you know, it's really, really important when we're doing feeding and eating to have a neutral language around food. So what I mean by that is, you know, not really identifying food as healthy versus not healthy or good versus bad. So a lot of us were brought up in a way that, you know, green beans are good for us, but chocolate cake is bad, or that's our healthy food. And so with this model, it's really, really important that we keep those foods in a neutral way. And food is food. And I practice that in my own practice that, you know, food fits in everywhere, but it's just about, and we'll get into the whole balance thing, definitely, but food is food, and food nourishes us in various different ways. And so I just wanted to touch on that because that's another thing with the whole social modeling. If we're talking about that broccoli is really healthy or really good for us, there is research to show that if you're kind of putting that into the child's head, oftentimes they're not going to eat that broccoli because they see healthy as not tasty. So that's really important to really model that neutral language when we're talking about food. Now, in your role as a parent or a caregiver, it is important to offer that balance, sure. So for example, at those meals, you can offer, I have a list here below. So 1 protein, 1 starch, 1 fruit or vegetable. Now I'll go into what those mean if you're not super familiar with food groups, but obviously offering that with preferred or safe or comfortable foods. So if your child only eats chicken nuggets, put chicken nuggets on the plate, but also including maybe like a familiar vegetable or something on the table. Like Vicky said, it doesn't have to be on the plate. It's about that exposure to that and the steps of feeding. So maybe your child initially couldn't handle the broccoli in the room, and maybe they have it on the table, and you move through those steps. And the other important thing is you can have milk with the meal, but only having water in between the meal. So having that set routine and following those meal times, again, will respect your child's cues to eating, and having those meal times will really help your child in feeding. So I hope that makes sense. So I just wanted to cover what those food groups are. Most of us are aware, but just in case you aren't sure. So your fruits and your vegetables, offering those. So like berries, mushrooms, celery, carrots, whatever that looks like for your family. Grains and starches. So like your rice, those are your carbier foods like your rice, pasta, corn, bread. Sometimes there are starchier vegetables that fit in there. But that's kind of the section where we see our beige foods that kids really, really like. And then our protein, so maybe it's wild game like elk, venison, deer, chicken, fish, eggs. Depending on the age, you might have nuts or like a nut butter, beans, and dairy is also grouped in to be a protein food. And then fat is so crucial when it comes to our child brain development. So like our avocado, butter, oil, meats and fishes. And, you know, fat, people are really scared of fat, but fat is so important when we're talking about children. Okay, so I kind of touched on this a little bit, but mealtime pressure, it happens everywhere. Maybe it happens at grandma's house, maybe it happens at your house. And I know, like, as parents, we really want our kids to have proper nutrition, and we want them to grow, and we want, maybe they're underweight and you're really concerned about that. And so I just wanted to touch on 2 examples that I hear all the time, and you know, it happens in everyone's home. But if you do not eat your peas, you do not get dessert. I just wanted to, obviously we're not having the regular engagement we normally would on Zoom, but I just wanted you guys to think about that for 1 second and think about why that might be a problem. So from what I've said about, you know, maybe you're thinking about why that might be a problem, I'll just explain from my own thoughts and experience why that might be a problem. So if we're saying if you do not eat your peas, you do not get dessert. Well, let's think about it from the whole social modeling and neutral language around food. So if we're saying you have to eat your peas before you get dessert, what we're actually doing is we're putting food in a hierarchy. So we're saying, okay, so your peas are your healthy food and your dessert is your unhealthy food. So in order to get those desserts, you have to get through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff. So we're kind of putting food in a hierarchy rather than kind of classifying food as all being good. So that's my main comment on that one. And then the whole clean your plate thing. If you thought about it, great. So an issue with that one is thinking back to those roles. So if you remember what I told you about those roles are that the child provides the parent provides and the child decides. So if you as the parent are saying, clean your plate, 5 more bites, and you're putting that pressure in their ear, what's happening is you're not really allowing or respecting your child's cues to eat. And then your child is saying, okay, mommy told me that I need to finish, versus, no, I want to listen to my tummy and it's full. So those are 2 examples that happen every day in our homes, but you can see why they can be an issue with picky eating or feeding, and really focusing on those roles. Okay, so family meals. I know in our busy lives, it's very hard sometimes. And right now, more of us are home and we're working from home. So maybe it's happening more. I don't know. It seems to be happening more just from talking to clients. But also I think of, bigger homes, maybe there's multi-generational homes, and family meals can look different for everyone. It may not be this perfect example that I have in this picture of 4 people. Maybe you have 12 people in your house, or maybe you only have 2. So the idea of family meals, like I kind of mentioned earlier, it is more than just nutrition. It is about that connection with your family. It's the time to sit down and connect and build that relationship with your family. But it also is about, getting in nutrition and getting in food and getting in those liked foods, but also getting in exposure to new foods. So whether it's at the same table. And we really encourage the family style of meals. So if you're not familiar with family style, that's where you kind of put everything on the table and then you can pass it around amongst each other. So that offers a good opportunity for people like your kids to pass the bowl and expose themselves to that food, whether it's on their plate or not. Family meals also can provide that structure. So maybe every night your child knows, okay, dinner's at 5:30 and that's what meal time is, or we eat every few hours or whatever. And Tanya will touch on that in a moment. And then also that modeling is really important to be shown here at these family meals. Okay. So I believe I'm turning it over now to Tanya.
Thanks. So I'll just, oh, okay, good. Sorry, I'm like trying to reorient to the Zoom world. And I feel like I'm yelling, but hopefully everyone's ears are okay. So I'm just gonna talk a bit about kind of like planning our meal times and structures within our day, as well as within meals, and kind of delving into some strategies to support meal times and some of our picky eaters. So first we'll kind of talk about kind of planning meals throughout our day. And so meals are super important as they can kind of help signal to us when certain activities begin and when others end. Like I know maybe we all kind of look forward to our lunch hour, right? And that's an opportunity where we take a break from our day, we eat together, and then we're like, woo, half of the day is done, and then we only have another bit to go before we get to go home or wrap things up. So I think, yeah, just kind of similar for our kids, right? We're planning meals with them can kind of help to organize their day and give them different things to look forward to, or just offer that space for connection. And I think, as Angelie has kind of explained, meals are meant to be joyful, where we're kind of sitting together and providing an opportunity to feel relaxed and connect with one another. And it can be more than just the nutrition. And I think for kids, it's super important because it helps them learn different motor skills for eating, and then have that sensory experience for eating, as well as just developing general language and social skills. So when we're kind of thinking about scheduling and planning some of our meals, it can help to plan snacks and meals kind of 2 to 3 hours apart. And this kind of helps our kids to begin to develop an appetite, and they can promote hunger as well. And so, for example, if you're maybe having breakfast at 8 a.m., then you might have a snack around 10:30, and then you might have lunch at 12:30. And so then offering like these snacks or these meals at those times, and then maybe offering water in between. And it can also help, I guess, for our kids to begin to develop some of those physiological cues of like, okay, I'm starting to feel hungry. This is when I eat, and helps with some of the rhythm for the day. And then it can also be helpful to kind of have the same place where you are eating, because again, that can kind of help to provide that cue that like, okay, like my mind and my body are going to start to get ready for eating. So sometimes, maybe everyone is together at the same table, or maybe like the same placemats are used, or the same utensils are kind of used, and that can just kind of help to signal that we're ready to begin our eating. Next slide. Thanks. And then if we think about like the actual meal time, we can kind of think of it maybe like a story where there's a beginning and a middle and an end. And we want to try to keep some of these elements consistent and predictable, because our kids do really well when things are consistent and predictable. And again, I think like kind of getting into that rhythm helps our kids prepare their minds and their bodies that like, okay, like it's time to get ready to eat. So in the beginning, like kind of before the meal begins, we want to try to give our kids a warning that, we're going to get ready to eat soon. And you know your child best, so you might know like, okay, maybe we need 5 minutes, or maybe we need 10, or whatever that warning might be. But it's really, really helpful to kind of get them to kind of shift into and to finish whatever activity they're doing. I was telling Angelie and Vicky too that I actually use this strategy with my family, and when I go eat with my parents, sometimes my mom, it's very important for us to all eat together. So I was like, Mom, like I just need a warning. So anyway, so our meal times are much more harmonious, but so anyways, it's a good strategy, I think, to use. And then so once you're kind of like, okay, it's 5 minutes before we have to get ready to eat, we then want to have a transition activity between getting from the activity that they were doing to the table. So often this can be washing our hands, or maybe like washing our hands and singing a song. And this kind of helps give the child like that sensory input to help get their bodies ready to sit at the table. And then during that middle part of the meal, that's where we really want to focus on kind of like eating together. And like, as Angelie was saying, kind of using maybe that family style serving to help get different exposures to different foods. And we also might want to focus on like telling stories about the foods that we're eating, or like talking about how our days were as well, kind of providing that opportunity for connection and consumption. And then at the end of the meal, we want to try to have a consistent and predictable cleanup routine. So maybe the child can bring their plate to the garbage and scrape off their plate, and then kind of move it into a sink or a bin, or whatever is possible, and just to kind of help with some of that routine and begin to signal like the ending of the meal. And we also want to consider how long can our kid realistically maybe sit down for a meal. And so sometimes aiming between 15 to 30 minutes can be helpful. And then sometimes too, even kind of before the pre-beginning and like the post-ending, it might help to have a consistent activity before or after. So maybe after meals, everyone kind of gets together and watches a movie together, or maybe everyone does quiet time, or maybe we brush our teeth and begin to move on to a different activity. Thanks. And so sometimes it can be tricky to maybe get our kids to kind of stay seated at the table, like they might have a lot of energy, or they might not like to be at the table because of maybe like negative experiences or just the negative relationship they might have with feeding. So it can be helpful to kind of begin to support our kids' posture. So like sitting with their hips and knees and ankles at 90 and kind of putting something under their feet so they're a bit supported, because it can just help their bodies focus on bringing their food to their mouth and chewing and swallowing and breathing, because here it's a bit trickier to maybe kind of chew and swallow all of our foods. And then sometimes our kids might be pushing their bodies away from the table or might not want to join. So sometimes helping to teach the kids that they can like move the food away from them can be helpful in having them sit at the table. So maybe they have a small plate beside them that they're not ready to taste the food or have it on their plate. So maybe they move it there. Or if it's too much, maybe they put it on the edge of the plate, just depending on the child. And then it might help to support any sensory needs your child might have. So if they're a bit wiggly, maybe they need something a bit more calming before kind of coming to the table. Or maybe if they're a bit more tired, maybe they need something a bit more active before, like maybe playing outside. And then another thought that might help to encourage our kids to stay at the table is using like a fun or interesting plate that incorporates their interests, and that might help them to sit there. So for instance, maybe a divided plate that is their favorite color, or a fork that has like dinosaurs on it, can be helpful. We can also try using a visual timer to have our kids kind of stay seated for a portion of the meal, if kind of sitting is a bit tricky for them. And then what we also want to do lastly is try to kind of set a limit or set an expectation that meals kind of happen at these scheduled times. And so if you leave the table, the kitchen is closed and we have to wait for the next planned meal before we can kind of eat again. And that just might encourage our kids to kind of like eat the foods that they like, and maybe try new foods as well. Thanks. So to support a positive and peaceful environment, I think what we want to do is kind of shift that focus away from what and how much and if, oh my gosh, if the child is eating, and maybe begin to kind of focus on some of the foods themselves and maybe connecting with each other and kind of demonstrating those good social behaviors that we kind of spoke about before. So what we can do is kind of focus on like sensory words to describe how the food is looking or tasting, or the textures, or the smells or the sounds. Like, so for example, if we're eating an orange, we might comment that, oh, the orange is orange and it's round and the skin is bumpy, but the inside is wet. And then, oh, it has a big smell. And then we can model, maybe we'll model like taking a bite and, oh, it's juicy and it's sweet. Just to kind of like help give different words to try to describe some of our foods. And then we can also kind of model some of those motor movements. So sometimes like exaggerating the way we might be chewing something, or how we might be holding a utensil, or maybe using a dip or whatever it may be. I think kids really do focus and watch what we're doing. So it's helpful for them to learn what the food might look like as well. So again, I think, yeah, it's focusing on that connection with each other as well. So maybe shifting the conversation to what are some good things that happened, or what are some stories connected to this food. I know like there's a particular food that I always have that kind of reminds me of when I was with my grandmother. So my grandmother, she like lives far away from me. She lives in Italy. So she, every time I eat string beans, I always like think of her, because there was this one time we were like peeling all these string beans and then made this like big family meal. So sometimes like linking nice stories can be a way to kind of shift that relationship with food. And I think like Angelie has mentioned, we really want to focus on kind of reducing some of that pressure and trying not to rely on some of those rewards. I think Vicky also said this too, like eating is really hard for some of our kids, right? It makes them feel super uncomfortable, like they might not be feeling safe. So kind of reducing some of that pressure can really take off some of that stress. And helps the child maybe like tune into some of the cues that they're feeling as well. And I think if you're gonna have like dessert or you're gonna have like kind of like a treat, it's okay, just serve it anyways and see if the kid wants it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And then for reducing and limiting distractions, I think when we have like TVs or radios or phones at the table, it might take away from what are we feeling in our body. So that can be tricky for some of our kids. So trying to limit some of those can help to get us back in tune with what we might be feeling. But if you are kind of relying on like tech to for feeding, it's okay to kind of keep that for now and then maybe think about a plan for reducing some of that. And I think lastly, it's okay to get messy. I think this is more for some of our younger kids and our toddlers. So it's okay if they're kind of like self-feeding and maybe it gets all over the place. It's helping them gain like motor skills, and it helps them gain different sensory experiences and kind of begin to learn like how does the touch feel, how does the taste, what's the texture, what's the temperature, gives their bodies those kinds of cues. But if you do prefer to spoon feed, maybe if it kind of goes to the side, it's okay. We can just leave it till the end of the meal and then wipe it all off then. So it's okay to get a little extra and maybe save it for later. So now we're just going to go into some strategies. So I think some of them are kind of what we've already talked about, but we just wanted to highlight a few. So for the first point, we just want to encourage everyone to model good feeding behavior. So again, our kids really look up to us and really want to copy us and may pay attention to what we're doing and the language that we're using. So when talking about foods, really thinking about maybe the sensory experience that it's related to, or a story that food might be related to as well. And again, like modeling those different motor movements as well can be helpful. And again, kids can do best when they know what to expect from us. So providing them with some of the structured times for eating and that familiar routine for meal times can be really helpful for them to be able to kind of develop some of those appetite and hunger and just those physiological cues to get their bodies and their minds ready for eating. And even having the same space for eating can be really helpful, again, because it's that environmental cue that we're ready to eat. And then it is important to know that, like, what are the foods that my child will eat, and making sure that they are offered at each one of these times. And we can kind of like rotate throughout them. So if they like chicken nuggets, it doesn't need to be chicken nuggets for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but it can be chicken nuggets, and maybe they like broccoli, and then so on and so forth, just kind of rotating it a bit. And then another tip is to make small changes to any preferred foods. So maybe if your child likes to eat a strawberry, like would they like a strawberry that is yogurt, like yogurt flavored strawberry, or will they like it in a drink, or will they like it if it's cut in half? Or will they like it if it looks like eyes on a pancake? Just kind of offering it in different ways. And sometimes cookie cutters can kind of help with some of that as well. And then even if, that's okay. It's okay, next slide. Perfect, thank you. Sorry, and then again, we want to reduce that that pressure at mealtime. So the child decides whether they'll eat and kind of how much they'll eat, and the parent will decide when and what and where, yeah, just honoring that. And then what we really want to encourage too is to kind of redefine try it. So when we ask our kids to try it, we're often asking them to like take a bite of something. But as Vicki has kind of highlighted, there's those different steps to eating, and really thinking about, okay, where is my child at for this food, and honoring that, and then kind of offering it to them in that way. And so maybe if they're okay with it on their plate, maybe the next step for them is like they start to poke it with a safe food or a familiar food, or they begin to like describe the smell of it, kind of honoring some of those steps. And then I think another point is that our kids might often say like, I don't like it and I don't want to try it. But I guess some of the science shows us that we need to try foods like 10 to 15 times before we actually know if we really like them or not. So maybe it's like offering that food to our kids like 10 to 15 times in different ways, that might kind of, again, allow them that exposure and maybe get to a different step on the steps to eating. And then another thing that can help that's kind of related to redefining try it and our steps to eating is just encouraging different mealtime jobs. So maybe our kids aren't ready to eat something, but maybe they'll cook with it, or maybe they'll help create a grocery list, or maybe they'll help put the groceries away, or maybe they'll help with harvesting some of the foods. So I guess offering different ways for that. And then we hope that maybe shifting that focus to offer some like a positive statement with your kids eating might be helpful. So like maybe like, wow, I really like the way you're holding your fork and bringing it to your mouth, or like, wow, you took a smell of that food, that's awesome. And just providing some of that encouragement there can help, and maybe they'll feel proud and feel different about the food offered. And then lastly, just using fun, maybe utensils or cookie cutters, just to offer some variety and maybe some encouragement for our kids to try it, try the food. And so then lastly, we just want to take a moment to thank everyone and remind everyone to be gentle with yourself. You're all doing the best that you can. We all are. You know, feeding can be stressful, and we know we all want the best for our kids. So we hope that some of our presentation was helpful. And I think we're going to stop the recording for now and maybe get into some cases or examples.